Okay, here's how Miro works. See, it's amazing.
What's everyone doing at David's desk?
Ever since marketing started using Miro's collaborative online whiteboard, he thinks all our other teams should sign up.
Why?
He says Miro's making his meetings disappear. And if every team gets on it, that means even less meetings. They're using Miro for brainstorms, mind maps, customer research.
So could we use Miro instead of having another 100 meetings for every round of feedback?
Yep. You can comment, react to ideas, even leave a recording on the board.
And what about presentations?
There are Miro templates for that.
How do you know so much about Miro?
I've actually been using it all along. I just used a Miro board to plan the best vacation.
Okay, I'm on board.
See how Miro users save up to 80 hours every year by meeting less and doing more. Get on board at Miro.com with 3 boards free forever. That's MIRO.com.
Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing. I'm your host Manu and Stefan. He's Stefan Bienkowski. Stefan, 5 days. That's how much longer we have to wait for the Bundesliga to return. Actually, by the time of this show's publication, it will be just 4 days. So, yeah, Bundesliga fans can be excited. We have the return of Fußball on Friday. And it's going to be a big one too, Stefan?
I cannot wait. I'm so sick of watching English and Italian football right now. That's not entirely true. I've quite enjoyed it. I was actually tweeting about the Manchester derby on Saturday and had a few followers tweet me saying, "Are you bored or something? Why are you watching this?" And yes, I was bored. I have been waiting for the Bundesliga return. I've been watching what's unfolding in Serie A with Napoli with envy, because I just kind of want to sink my teeth into something similar in German football. So nothing quite scratches that itch quite like the Bundesliga, which is exactly why we do this show, and exactly why probably you, dear listener, are listening right now. So yeah, I really can't wait for it to come back. It's kind of surprised me. I knew it was in the calendar. I knew it was coming. But there's just been so much mayhem going on in the transfer window, especially with both our jobs right now. Thank you, Chelsea. The things have just completely forget what's going on sometimes and realize that, the Bundesliga is right around the corner.
Yeah, it is right around the corner. And the other thing is, too, it's been pretty quiet for German clubs in the transfer windows. We haven't really covered, there was outgoing transfer, Jorginho Ruta, right, to Leeds United for a ridiculous amount of money, and Schade to Brentford for a ridiculous amount of money. But incoming, it's been really quiet. And I think, I spoke to an agent about this, and he said, wait until the first game start and a couple teams lose. Then it will be...
Yeah.
And then it will really get kickstarted and you will get a bunch of panic buys. But, we will do our transfer show later this week. And that probably hopefully going to have some more stories on that then. But yeah, the Bundesliga is where it's at. The restart of the Bundesliga is where it's at this show. So we decided to do a little bit of a preview. We both picked 3 clubs, Stefan. 2 that we think will have a good, it's technically not the second half of the season, a good restart of the season. And 1 that we think is going to struggle. And I think we should probably start with our picks right after this break. This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. Basketball is back, and BetOnline remains your number 1 source for all your sports betting needs this season. You will always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. And is your continued source for all sports wagering information. BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports and events, whether that's NFL, NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, or even golf. Head to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to receive your rewards. That's it, BLEAV, to receive your rewards. Bet online, where the game starts. So yeah, Stefan, let's start with the good news first, right?
So
yeah,
I have not learned my lesson. I keep going back, and I just can't help myself. Hope springs eternal, as they say, and I'm once again sitting here quite publicly stating that I think Leverkusen are going to hit the ground running, and I think they're going to have a really good second half of the season. So when we say we think clubs are going to have a good or a bad season, I think we're kind of within the context of kind of how they've done in the first half of the season, obviously. And yeah, I mean, obviously Leverkusen just could not do any worse than they did in the first half of the season, more or less. And I think there's probably three things that I think probably play in their favour here. Perhaps the first one, on a wider scale, is that they actually finished the year quite strongly. They finished with only one defeat in their last 7 games, I believe, in all competitions. They finished with 3 wins on the bounce in the Bundesliga. Kind of felt like Xabi Alonso was kind of finally getting to grips with that team. He knew what he was doing with it. His back three was kind of slowly but surely, coming to the fore and working for him. So I feel like it's and after this prolonged winter break, which, as we've talked about numerous times, it's basically like an entire new pre-season. I have no doubt that he's only managed to cement that, and he's only managed to kind of like forge stronger bonds with those players, and they all know kind of tactically what they want from what he wants from them, rather. And the two other ones are 2 players in particular who I think really should improve or offer far more in the second half of the season than they did in the first half. The first one's obviously Florian Wirtz, who was out injured, and we kind of mentioned this last week on one of the podcasts that it's easy to, well, not easy to forget because he's obviously still a big star, but people. It's quite in the way football works. Obviously, is that people move on so quickly to the next player, and since Wirtz has picked up that injury, just the entire limelight in German football has been placed firmly on Jamal Musiala, and he's done tremendously well there. But it's easy to forget that not so long ago the two of them were kind of neck and neck for potential, for what they were doing on the pitch. You can maybe even argue that last season Wirtz was a little ahead of him in terms of responsibility he was taking on at his club, and I just think him back in that Leverkusen squad can only be a good thing, and it can only be a transformative thing for that team. That I actually wrote at least one newsletter in the first half of the season, kind of talking about how, if you look at the way Leverkusen play and the way they were struggling to score goals, they desperately lacked him as a playmaker. And I actually think that will play into the second player who I think will play a huge part, and that's obviously Patrick Schick. Who's been pretty terrible, to be perfectly honest with you, so far this season. He's had some moments, but by no means has he performed to the level that you would expect of him, to the level that Leverkusen would demand, having just signed him up to a new contract last year. But I also wrote a newsletter about him through the year, and I looked back at his kind of goal-scoring trends over the course of his career, and what that showed was that he has these kind of cycles where he has, a strong season and a poor season and a strong season and a poor season. And in the past, that was kind of chalked up to whether he was good enough at certain levels. So, for example, I can't remember if he performed at Roma or didn't perform at Roma, but one way or another, he was deemed to have not been good enough and potentially getting found out at a certain level. But if you kind of look over the grander scale of his whole career, it suggests that he does always tend to bounce back after a kind of prolonged period of not scoring. And I think he's due to do that in 2023. I know he's still injured with an abductor injury. I think he should be back this weekend because he's been out. I think he picked it up in early December, so he might be back by now. But if he misses the first 1 or 2 games, that's fine. I'm not really expecting him to be that immediate. But I just think in the grand scheme of this whole second half of the season, and 18 games it is, I think Schick and Wirtz will, be back in that team performing, and I just expect Leverkusen to start clawing their way up that league table.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good bet, to be honest with you, Stefan. I think Leverkusen, there's also a few other pieces in there as well, right? I think Adam Lozek is probably going to find his form at some point. He's someone to watch. And a really exciting player. And I think a lot of people were really surprised how quickly Leverkusen got that deal done. Looks like Hudson-Odoi is staying. I think he's going to be a valuable piece for them too. I think Leverkusen is definitely one to watch. An exciting team to watch too, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's I know you you were careful about this one because Leverkusen always have this ability to disappoint, but I think this one is actually not a bad bet at all. They start the season, the return of the season. I'm struggling with the second half of the season thing, Stefan, because it's just not true. We're just not there yet. But they're starting match day 16 with a derby against Gladbach on Sunday.
Yeah.
Which is going to be a super interesting game to watch, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a really tough game. I think another thing I would add as well, just to kind of thinking about that, is that speaking to people at the club in the first half of the season about what was going on, and there were some actual suggestions from kind of former players as well that, the issues at Leverkusen were actually down to the fact that they had all these new players, and I think there's a lot of talk about how there was just like 5 or 6 different kind of groups in that dressing room, depending on who spoke what language. And I think if that was an issue, I can appreciate that that's an issue at first when such a high turnover of players. But I think that's something that also gets fixed in time. I think that's something that becomes less and less an issue in time. So I think we're probably going to see far more cohesion in this team. And I think Klozek's a perfect example of that, who's a very good, very talented player who was kind of just thrown into that team and asked to kind of fill in for Florian Wirtz at times last season, which is just not his role. So he'll finally be able to play the role that he wants to play. I'm very excited to see what Leverkusen can do.
Yeah, me too. I'm actually, that's one of the games penciled in for the weekend, but we're doing our preview show later this week, so let's leave it for that. My first team that I think is really going to be on the up, and this is maybe a little bit of an easy pick, but going for it anyways, is RB Leipzig. I think the only question mark I have with them is goalkeeping, which is, of course, a topic for another team that we'll discuss later down the road. But I just think that this team is really going to keep firing the same way they were under Marco Rose before the break. And I also think that the fact that Timo Werner, for example, didn't go to the World Cup. Yes, Christopher Nkunku is still out, and it's going to be interesting to see how that's going to impact them. He's expected at the end of February to return then, right? Actually, they might actually still do something in that department. As I said earlier in the show, watch for a couple teams to lose, and then they might do something. But Timo Werner not going to the World Cup, I think, is actually going to be a benefit from them. He really wants to probably hit the ground running, right, and kind of show that this return to Leipzig wasn't a step back for him. And I think he's also, with Nkunku now pretty much across the line to join Chelsea in the summer, there's going to be a lot of expectations on him to fill that role. So I think he's actually a player to watch in that regard. But there's other players in there as well, right? Someone like Andre Silva, for example, who I still think could be a really good signing for this club. Dani Olmo played the World Cup with Spain, wasn't exactly a huge success for them either. So I think he wants to come in, and he's actually a really good candidate for me to maybe replace Nkunku a little bit in that forward role. And then I'm super excited about seeing what Josko Gvardiol can do, right? Now that he has played this phenomenal World Cup, I think he's going to take up quite an important role for them. And I also, what I thought was really impressive is the way Marco Rose, the way he came in and navigated a really difficult schedule, like a really difficult schedule, a schedule that was in many ways regarded by us as so difficult that we thought, okay, he could even be on the verge of being fired. And instead, he managed to jump up into third place in the Bundesliga. He got out of the Champions League group, still in the Pokal. I think that is an enormous amount of success. And yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what he's actually done with this team now that he had like a full winter to prepare and work with them, right? And I think this is still very much one of the most talented squads in German football. And I'm just really curious to see what he's going to do with it. And I'm also really curious to see what Max Eberl is going to do in this transfer window. If he does bring in someone like Manu from Gladbach, I think that would be a tremendous signing for them. And yeah, I'm just really curious, Stefan, about this Leipzig squad.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, Leipzig were probably the team that I watched the most in person so far this season, actually.
Yeah.
At least in terms of German clubs. And it was really interesting, especially in that Champions League campaign, just watching them kind of develop and get stronger and stronger every year. And I guess they're a bit like Leverkusen, as you said, in the sense that they have so much talent that they really there's no reason why they shouldn't be kind of just continue to move up and up and up. And I'm also just really impressed with the way they've kind of future-proofed this squad in the sense that, yes, of course, Christopher Nkunku will leave in the summer. I think Max Eberl actually more or less confirmed it today, actually. And that's fine, but he's obviously staying for the remainder of the season, which I was kind of chuckling to myself when I was looking at all this Chelsea news, and I was thinking, if Chelsea had just managed to get Nkunku over the line for a January move, they wouldn't have had to sign Felix, Mudryk, whoever else. They probably would have saved themselves the best part of 100 million euros. But obviously Leipzig dug their heels in, which they're very good at when it comes to transfers and stuff. And that's just one thing. And as we've kind of talked about, we've got it well on the record that they've also got a whole back catalogue of forward players who are ready to try and step in there. But the one that really impresses me is how quickly Leipzig have moved on from Konrad Laimer. I've been really impressed with Schlager in midfield. I thought he was an okay player at Wolfsburg, but the way that he's just kind of stepped up into that team, and having watched him in person, he's just a very unassuming, very straightforward, just does his job and gets on with it. And it's really interesting because I think there's maybe a story, and I think it was maybe Kicker did a big kind of profile on him over the winter break, and I think it was Derek Ray was tweeting this. He was basically saying that when he's not playing football, he's away like hiking with his friends, or he's away. He went to like Southeast Asia with some friends on the winter break, and he was just kind of backpacking and stuff, whatever. So he's obviously just a very laid back guy. And that does kind of come across the football pitch, I must admit. But him and Haidara have done really well there, to the extent where, all this kind of murmurs about Konrad Laimer leaving for Bayern Munich, I think, has just been kind of met with the shrug of a shoulder, to be honest with you. And so that kind of suggests to me that Leipzig are on a very strong footing, and I completely agree with you. Actually, I think they're going to be very good. I mean, I'm about to talk about another team who, I
know you're going to shock our subscribers.
Well, I was about to say I'm about to talk about that. I'm about to talk about them being, doing well, but I don't think they'll do as well as Leipzig will do, shall I say? So, yeah, I think Leipzig are going to do very well in this end of the season. Even the fact that Nkunku in particular strikes me as the kind of player who will just continue doing well, even though he's already signed up to join another club next season. I think he's obviously got ambitions to do something with Leipzig. And
I think Werner will do really well too.
Yeah, and they're only 6 points off Bayern, so crazier things have happened.
Yeah, and you know what? They can make a statement right off the bat. I mean, you can't get much better than that to start the return of the Bundesliga on Friday with Bayern against Leipzig, against Bayern in Leipzig. Yeah, that's going to be insane. It's going to be a really, really good match to watch. We're going to preview that in great detail later this week, but I am really excited to see it. And, I think this is a statement game that could make the Bundesliga either very interesting or very boring very quickly. But if Leipzig win it, then all of a sudden everything at the top of the table shrinks together again. And that could also open maybe the door for a club that you are going to talk about next. Everyone take a deep breath. Stefan has something positive to say about Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah, part of me thinks I might regret this, but yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of I'm getting some good vibes off of Dortmund right now. There's a kind of backhanded insult to this, I guess, in the sense that I just also think that they can't do any worse than they did in the first half of the season. And of course, everything just revolves around Sebastian Haller coming back. Not only is he back and fit, but he's seemingly way ahead of schedule. He wasn't even expected to take part in these friendly matches. He took part in both. Scored a hat-trick in one of them. And I know these are only friendly matches, so we kind of have to take him with a pinch of salt. But the fact that he's playing, the fact that he's looking match sharp, I just don't think we can overstate how big a deal that is for Dortmund, because even though that team has been riddled with issues, I feel like first and foremost the biggest problem is that they just simply could not score goals. In the first half of the season, or 15 games if you want to call it, they only scored 25 goals. And actually I put out a graph about this maybe a week or two ago on Twitter, and explaining why it was within the context of why Moukoko is so important to Dortmund. And the point I was making was that this team, or this club, hasn't scored such a low number of goals at this point in the season since Jurgen Klopp's final season at the club, which obviously if you're of a certain vintage, you'll remember that was just sheer chaos and the end of days vibes to it for Dortmund.
You want to know what that feels like? Just look at Liverpool right now.
Hey, it was even worse than that, because they were in the relegation zone, which was quite interesting, because I noticed our good friend Chris Williams, I think, maybe pointed it out, that Jurgen Klopp said that he's never felt worse after a game than one of Liverpool's recent defeats, and he's like, well, they were in a relegation fight at Dortmund, so surely that was worse. But anyway, that's a side point. So yeah, they desperately needed a goal scorer. Moukoko obviously did a decent job of that. He's proved that he can be a senior player in that team, and he's used that leverage to get himself a good contract, which now looks like it's going to go over the line. Very good for him. That's his prerogative. Can't really fault him for that. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the second half of the season he actually gets far less game time, because now Sebastian Haller's back. And unless we see any kind of hiccups with his fitness or his match sharpness, then I think he offers a completely different edge to that Dortmund team. And he offers that kind of target man role that I think the team have kind of been crying out for, just because that's kind of how they were set up on with Erling Haaland last season. But yeah, and I think there's just other minor things as well. For example, I think, that kind of back line will have had more time to adjust to itself. Obviously, Schlotterbeck and Niklas Süle were pretty crazy in the first half of the season, but they would have got more time to kind of embed themselves amongst each other. Schlotterbeck's been quite public during the winter break. He's gave a few interviews saying that he knows he wasn't good enough. He knew he wasn't up to his own standards. So he's going to have to work on that. Rafael Guerreiro, coming back from a very strong World Cup, should hopefully help in that regard. They're still wide open at right back, to an almost comical degree. As I pointed out on Twitter the other day, Thomas Munier announced on Sunday, or maybe Saturday, that he was no longer needed an agent because he had no interest in leaving Dortmund, and the very next day he picked up a long-term injury. So, maybe Dortmund need to pick up a right back before January finishes. But, you then add maybe like Marco Reus coming back from injury as well. You've got, obviously, Adeyemi, Daniel Malin, who've obviously now got more time to bed in. Malin in particular, I thought, looked quite strong in those kind of mid-season friendlies. Gio Reyna might feel like he has a point to prove after the World Cup. So I'm not by any means suggesting that Dortmund have kind of paved over all the cracks and that there aren't still issues in that team. And at the end of the day, they still don't have a novice head coach who has looked very tactically naive to me this season. However, I do feel like up front they've got Sebastian Haller in there.
Yeah.
At the back, they've got two very good defenders. We know that they're two very good defenders who maybe got a better grip on things. And I just don't think it could be any worse than what we saw in the first half of the season.
Today, we discuss Miro. Listen, when it comes to running client workshops, the dream, of course, is to get those creative juices flowing, right? But typically what ends up happening is thousands of hours get wasted because of poorly facilitated meetings. So I have Maya with me today. She's a consultant who runs Fortune 100 workshops, from leadership training to team building, and she has the insider tip on what makes things work. Maya?
Thank you, Jason. I've been doing this a long time. My number one tip is to bring everyone into that visual collaboration platform. So personally, I use Miro, and it's completely changed how I interact with the room. You have to give people a way to feel like they're in the room even when they're not. That's something you can do easily in Miro. Otherwise, they've seen the same slides and format 1,000 times.
Falling asleep, eyes glazing over, yawns, all that.
Exactly. When people follow me on the Miro board, everyone is literally going on a journey with me. We're adding thoughts, we're reacting, and we're voting for the best ideas. It's great.
Connective magic. I like it. That's MIRO.com.
No, I mean, and they have like a lot of things to make up in that regard, right, in the table. But I find it interesting listening to you about the holes in the squad, right? And right back is the most obvious one. I suspect that they will do something in that regard. And we've talked about that in the transfer show. I think it's a glaring hole. It's an important one to fill. I can see them maybe looking at the current situation and say, okay, well, it's good enough for now. Maybe good enough for Augsburg, who they're facing first on Sunday as well. But this is one of those where I think that it's been all very positive, and like the whole Sebastian Haller story has, I think, maybe almost rattled this team awake a little bit, right? And like it seemed so bad going into the World Cup, so negative, right? To such an extent, and it is months ago now, literally, that people were questioning whether Edin Terzic was going to survive in his job. And the World Cup happens. A bunch of bad things happen at the World Cup, including because of some Borussia Dortmund players, Niklas Süle, for example, right? But then Sebastian Haller comes back, and it's almost like the weight is lifted off the shoulders. Don't you get that sense with this team, Stefan? Like that's how it feels for me. It's like the 40 million euro signing that like almost like was threatened to maybe never play for this club, was battling a deadly disease, had to have a second operation. Now he's coming back, and it almost feels like all the weight has been lifted off collectively of everyone's players' shoulders. Yeah, that's the sense that I'm getting.
Yeah, and I hope this doesn't come across as distasteful in the way I'm going to kind of portray this, but considering what Sebastian Haller has gone through this season and the way that he's managed to pull himself back into match fitness, must surely say to everyone else in that changing room, okay, my problems are not problems. If he can get back up, and if he can start, and if he can score a hat-trick in pre-season friendlies and, get himself ready and up for this second half of the season, then I've got no excuse. And I'm not suggesting that, I know that sounds really reductive, and people have issues for genuine reasons, and, I'm sure there's plenty of players in that squad who aren't happy for legitimate reasons, but from a purely psychological or plain point of view, as you said, he's just such an excellent example of perseverance, and it must be great for team morale. It must be great for team morale, and it'd be really interesting to see how much of a difference he can make in that team. And I'm not exactly expecting miracles from Dortmund. Whereas I would expect maybe, as I just kind of suggested there, Leipzig could even push on and make a title challenge. I'm not by any means expecting that from Dortmund. I think they'll look far more composed. I think they'll probably be able to push into that top four and push out someone like Freiburg or Frankfurt. And they may even beat Chelsea in the Champions League, actually, the way things are going right now.
Oh, God, yeah.
But, yeah, I just think they'll look far more settled. They'll look more like a team. And and then they can take it from there and see what happens next season, I suppose.
Yeah. You mentioned it already, Frankfurt. I don't think that's the team that they're going to push out, Stefan. That's my second positive to watch. I'm actually really excited to see them back in action. First and foremost, I can't wait to watch Randall Kolomoani in the Bundesliga again. He had such a fantastic World Cup. Yes, he did miss that chance, but let's be honest here. Martinez pulls a world-class stop there. He doesn't. That stop you make maybe once 100 times, right? And he just happened to make it in the World Cup final. But I thought that Randall Kolomoani, for a player who wasn't even supposed to be there, played an incredible good World Cup. And I can't wait to see him back in the Bundesliga. But this entire side is just so well put together. And from top to bottom, right? In fact, when you look at all the top 4 teams at the moment, or the top 3, I guess, because sorry, Freiburg, if you're not mentioning you in this, but you look at Leipzig, Bayern, or Frankfurt, they're the only ones with an international class goalkeeper at the moment, in Kevin Trapp, and Bayern did try and make an offer, and he kind of shrugged it and laughed it off, right? Because I think he knows exactly what he has in Frankfurt, and the opportunity that is there. But I just look at this entire team, whether it's like players like Indika in center back, and then in midfield, there's so much depth in midfield. It's actually kind of incredible, and they just keep on adding to it. And and Paxton Aronson, they signed a really, really exciting talent from America. I think a lot of US and a lot of our US listeners are going to be very excited about him being in Frankfurt. And up front, their attack is so deep, in fact, that they could just sell one of their guys and it wouldn't even hurt them. And I just think this team is just poised to go strength to strength in the second half of the season. The Champions League round of 16 against Napoli is going to be quite tough, especially when you think of what they just done to Juventus right on the weekend. But I don't think this is a lost cause for Frankfurt at all. In fact, when they've been in Italy over the last few European seasons, this is a team that's very seasoned in Europe at this moment already, right? They had 3 deep runs in the Europa League, winning one of those. And I think that in the Champions League, we kind of thought, okay, well, they're not going to get out of that group. And then they did quite handily. I think this is a team that's going to be quite dangerous in the second half of the season. And I think even if they do go out against Napoli, that might actually benefit them, because then all of a sudden they've already accomplished more already in the Champions League than anyone expected. Then they can say, okay, well, this year Europe is not our number one priority. This year our number one priority is to do well in the Bundesliga and to finish in the top 4 and get back in the Champions League. And I think they're going to be thereabouts. I'm pretty sure that if Dortmund wants to push out one of the top 4 teams, I don't think that's going to be Frankfurt, Stefan.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. Thinking about it, Napoli might be the perfect opposition for them, just in the sense that they're such a gung-ho side, and Frankfurt, made short work of just about every gung-ho side that they played last season, and obviously they've done a great job of it this time around as well. And I completely agree with you. I actually think, as good as Frankfurt have been this season, I think there's actually more to come of a few of these players. Yeah. You mentioned obviously Kolomoani continues to get better with every passing day. Kind of still waiting to see if Jesper Lindstrom can. He's obviously made a step up. I think he is playing better this season than he did last season. But it would be nice to see him kind of continue improving in that regard, in terms of, I know he scored as many goals as Kolomoani, so I can't expect too much from him, but he's obviously a young player who I think is going to get better and better. But there's other guys in that team, Alario, Götze, Bore, even like
Kamada.
Kamada's an interesting one. I was going to bring him up in a moment. I was just going to say those 3 players have actually, Götze in particular has played well without really getting goals and assists on the chart, which I want to see more of from him. Yeah. Especially if he's going to have to end up replacing Kamada, because we're still not entirely sure what's going on with Kamada, if I'm not mistaken. And it'd be great to see him sign a new contract and just kind of commit to the squad. And like you said, just kind of fit into that help them cement that top 4 finish, and just as we've talked about in the show before, just cement their ranking in German football, because they've got the support, they've probably got the finances, they've certainly got the squad, they've certainly got the head coach for it. And Oliver Glasner, I think, is one of the best head coaches in the league. And yeah, I completely agree with you. I think they've had a good start to the season, and I've been really impressed actually with their kind of consistency in the first half of the season. I know I kind of joked throughout the season that they only seem to do well when I don't watch them, so take that, I guess, with a pinch of salt. But
in fairness, one of the best games that they did play, you did watch, and that was in the Champions League.
Yeah, that's true. So
they did break that curse eventually.
Yeah, I completely agree. But yeah, they just look so at home at that stage in the Champions League, look so at home in that top 4 spot, I think. So I completely agree with you. It'd be great to see them have a good 2023.
And I do think that they're, in terms of growth and where they can be, not just in German football, but in international football, they're the club with the biggest potential in the Bundesliga. They can probably emulate, if they do things right and work at it long term, they could emulate what Bayern Munich is in Bavaria, with the financial backing that city has, and being what the Germans call the Drehkreuz of Europa, the turning table of Europe, because of the large airport, right? There's a ton of potential there, and I think too, when you look at the likes of Kamada or Ndika, they should just take a close look at some of the players that have left for greener pastures, quote unquote. Someone like Filip Kostic, who thought Juventus was a step up and is now struggling in Serie A, and it's just sometimes it's not better somewhere else. And I think a lot of the Frankfurt departures have noticed that over the years. You look at Ante Rebic, Jovic, Sebastian Haller is, of course, now at Dortmund. But I think there comes a point when maybe some of these guys will say, maybe it's quite good here. We can play Champions League football here in front of 60,000 mad fans, best stadium atmosphere in Germany. This is a club that's on the up. It's not like you're getting paid with peanuts there either. They make really good money now in Frankfurt, and you live in a very metropolitan big city. You're at an airport where you can go anywhere in the world within a heartbeat. I think some of these players might come to the realization at some point that maybe it's not better somewhere else. And I think when Frankfurt hit that, and I think this is also something that Frankfurt have over Dortmund. For example, Dortmund is quite a small town, right? And you stand out if you drive a golden Lamborghini like Aubameyang did in Dortmund. That's not necessarily in the bank capital of Europe. That's not the case there. You drive a golden Lamborghini, you're probably average. And I think that's something that city has going for itself.
Yeah, I think we can definitely agree that bankers and footballers both have equally terrible taste in fashion and cars and things like that. So yeah, they seem to fit in with one another quite well. Yeah.
So I think that's maybe something that Frankfurt has going that is getting maybe still underestimated by quite a few, including players that play for the club. But they're doing such a great job. I saw a rumor this week, I had to laugh about it a little bit, that Glasner is now linked with you ready for this, Stefan? Head coaching job of Chelsea.
Why not? Hey, why not? Maybe they're going to sign him as the next winger.
Yeah, he's already said no. So anyways, let's go to the bad. And I'm just going to use my club first before you reveal your maybe a little bit surprising choice. And I went very easy here. I went with Schalke. Return to the Bundesliga. Germany's arguably third or second biggest club by membership. Reach, fan volume, used to be by finances too. Schalke 04 are in big trouble, Stefan, and last in the table with just 9 points already 5 points away from a non-relegation spot. That doesn't seem like a lot, but I look at this team and I look at, okay, well, the winter window has been open now for 16 days. Yes, they haven't kicked the ball yet, but I just don't think they have enough in the winter to actually address the issues. Goal scoring, defense, cohesion in midfield. The top 2 goal scorers is Simon Tirode and Marius Bülter with 3 goals each. There hasn't been anyone added to this team who I think could say, produce the 10, 15 goals that you will need. You look at the contrast between Schalke and Werder Bremen, where Werder Bremen have going to probably finish the season with at least 2 strikers scoring in double digits. I don't see that at Schalke at all, Stefan. And that, if you don't have that, I don't think you can survive in the Bundesliga.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've been kind of worried about Schalke for this entire season. We kind of said when we did our previews that they just didn't seem like they had enough goals in them whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they would struggle, and that's exactly what's happened. There's chaos at the club as always, and the only thing that I could really see going in Schalke's favour is that they obviously brought Thomas Reis in before the winter break. He had a really tough start, I must admit. Obviously came up against Freiburg, then he came up against an informed Werder Bremen, and then he had Mainz and Bayern Munich. And that win against Mainz suggested that they might be able to turn a corner. But, so I don't know. I kind of feel like Thomas Reis having a whole pre-season to kind of get his tactics instilled in that squad, and to kind of just get everything back to basic and just do what he did, obviously, at his previous club and just make them so hard to beat, then there might be some hope for Schalke. But no, I completely agree with you. They look like a team just waiting for relegation at this point, which is a shame because they're obviously such a big club, and I would have liked to have seen them stay up, but they just haven't really done their homework. They haven't really put together a proper squad. They're still fiasco with paying ex-head coaches, and even trying to hire Thomas Reis was a fiasco because, if I'm not mistaken, they tried to pick him up earlier than they did. That backfired, so they had to stick with the guy that they had, which obviously wouldn't have helped things. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's just same old Schalke, but maybe Thomas Reis can perform a miracle. Who knows?
Well, I think you will have to perform a miracle for this team to stay in the league. As you said, it would be a huge shame because it is such a giant in German football. But, sometimes you have to go through that cycle of second division football twice. The depth that they carried into relegation was enormous. Didn't help that their sponsor, Gazprom, right? They had to cut ties with them very quickly because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the money that has come in since hasn't been able to replace that. And I'm worried about Schalke. You look at HSV and the amount of years that they have spent in the second division. It's really difficult to reestablish yourself once you form once. And we talked last week a little bit about the need of investors in German football. I think once you've fallen down that far down the ladder, and it's of course very difficult to do with a club like Schalke, because Schalke, like all other teams in German football, even though they're membership clubs, they at least have some sort of professional structure at the top now, right? Where a joint stock or closed stock company kind of runs the football operations, and that allows you to sell certain parcels to investors. Schalke is still operated in this primitive eingetragener Verein way, which a lot of German fans, of course, love, but makes it really difficult for anyone to actually come in and say, okay, we're going to buy a parcel of this club and give you a bunch of money to fix things. And I think as long as Schalke have the structure that they have as a club, that's not going to be fixed, and they're not going to be able to make up the gap that they have lost, which is, of course, really concerning. I think this is a club that's ripe for the picking. If they come in and say, we change the structure, I bet you like a US investor would just go in and buy this team and probably fix it. So yeah, interesting one to watch. Your final club, Stefan, you're going to surprise a few people with this, maybe.
Well, maybe
Bayern Munich?
Yeah, maybe not the Bayern Munich fans on Twitter who are convinced that I use this podcast as a platform to constantly talk down their club, which of course I'm about to do right now. So I guess there's that. And yeah, I think things are tricky for Bayern Munich right now because they've obviously got a number of injuries from the World Cup, possibly the most unluckiest team to come out of the World Cup in the sense that, picked up, at least two major injuries from it, Lucas Hernandez and, Mazraoui, the latter of which some complications over that because there's maybe some suggestions he actually played after picking up an illness for Morocco. But two of them are out for a long period, and of course Manuel Neuer then picks up an injury after it as well, or I can't remember if it was during it, but after Germany went out anyway. And of course Sadio Mane picked up an injury beforehand. So this January transfer window has been one which has just led to constant media speculation over who they're going to sign. Oliver Kahn and Salihamidzic have just been on and off television, radio, newspapers, talking about the players that that they've got everything under control and they're looking to sign players, and it's all kind of frantic and hectic again. And although we can usually just chalk most of that up as just hyperbole from the media, I think there should be genuine concerns over the state of the squad going into the second half of the season. Obviously, defence is the big issue. I thought Lucas Hernandez was probably Bayern's best defender in the first half of the season. And he now has to step aside for Upamecano and De Ligt. And, to be fair to Upamecano, I thought he actually played very well for Bayern in the first half of the season. But at times in that World Cup, he reverted back to his old panicky, overly physical aspects. Which, if I was a Bayern fan watching that, I would think, I'd kind of hope that been kind of trained out of him by now. So I'm intrigued to see how he does in the second half of the season. But of course, the far bigger issue is De Ligt, who signed for this kind of record fee and just has not shown himself to be anywhere near capable of stepping into that team. And ideally, Hernandez picks up an injury and De Ligt can just slot straight in there. But I'm really not entirely sure that's going to be able to work out. And of course, they've signed Ali Blind, who, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, doesn't strike me as a very inspiring option, to be honest. I just, even when he was playing well for Ajax and he was playing regularly for the Ajax team, I still thought he was quite a limited player.
His underlying numbers are really strong, though.
Yeah, I know, but I just think as a player he's quite a limited player, especially if you're looking at the kind of stages in the Champions League that Bayern Munich are hoping to get to. So, and then you add obviously Mazraoui, their first choice right back getting injured. Benjamin Pavard seeming to be in a tricky situation. It's unsure whether he'll be able to slot in there and kind of do a job for them. And, that defence already kind of looks like it's got a number of issues before you even get to the fact that Manuel Neuer's out of that team. And, I really don't think you can overstate how important it is that Manuel Neuer's not in this team. Maybe a couple of seasons ago, you could argue that, he was beginning to look on his way. They had to replace him, but had a really strong season. And although he has looked a little shaky this season, he still puts in huge performances. He still makes huge saves. He's still a very kind of dominating figure in that defence. And even if Bayern are able to sign someone like Jan Sommer, still don't think he's going to be able to make up the difference there. I'm still find myself baffled with Bayern's really efforts to sign Sommer, because I still think of him as a perfectly good goalkeeper, but by no means a top class goalkeeper. So I'm not even sure he'd make a useful short-term signing. And Sven Ulrich as well, I'm not entirely convinced by either. So that's my main concern for Bayern. I just think defensively they may struggle in the big games. It'll be interesting to see how they do against Leipzig, but I think particularly in the Champions League they may struggle in that regard. And then I think also up front you can kind of look at it and think, well, they do have a number of great players up front. They've got a number of players who are doing okay. I wrote a piece last week about Sadio Mane and how his numbers are actually quite impressive this season. Yeah. He has improved on what he was doing at Liverpool the season before, but there's still that kind of emphasis that they are reliant on Choupo-Moting to be that kind of striker. They still can't find a way to step away from the ghost of Robert Lewandowski, shall I say. And although it's great that Choupo-Moting can step in and score goals in the Bundesliga, and I know he has done so in the group stages, but I just can't think of him stepping into that team in a Champions League quarter-final or semi-final and being a difference maker. I could be wrong, and I'll happily eat my hat if and when he scores that goal to take them through to the semi-finals or the final of the Champions League, but it just seems to me like a huge issue. Not to mention the quite alarming demise of Thomas Muller as well, who, to be fair, at 33, certainly deserves to, begin to consider putting his hanging up the boots. Shall I say? Having said that, I was quite surprised to see him say that he's not going to retire from international football, but everything that I've seen on the pitch this season would suggest that maybe he should, but I don't know. I just think there are some. The problem with Bayern Munich is that minor or small margins are actually big margins because, they have to be functioning at 100% to ensure that they can compete against other big clubs around Europe. And I just think there's too many issues in defence, and the fact that Choupo-Moting is still such an important player, or has become an important player in this team, suggests to me that Nagelsmann's still kind of paving over the cracks here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am such a geek, Stefan, and I actually watched their friendly against Salzburg last Friday. This is how desperate I was for return of football, which turned out a pretty good choice for a match to watch because it was a 4-4 in the end. At one point, Salzburg were up 4-1, which tells you everything you need to know about Bayern Munich's state of defense. At this stage of the season, they were in absolute shambles. It's entertaining for us as spectators, right, to see something like that. And Salzburg have, of course, a history of putting Bayern Munich to the sword in preseason friendlies. A few years ago when it was Roger Schmidt still at Salzburg and Pep Guardiola at Bayern. I think Salzburg won a friendly 4-1. So there's a history there, but I did think it was intriguing to see how much disarray there was in that back line. And although Sven Ulrich had a little bit of a better game, Bild gave him a 2, which I thought was... So 2 is the second best grade you can get in Germany. It's 1 to 6, right? 1 is being the equivalent of an A, and then 2 is B, and so on. They gave him a 2, and I thought, okay, well, I didn't think he was that good. You give up 4 goals against Salzburg. And of course, what is interesting about that result is that they're playing a team that's playing pretty much the same football on Friday, which is obviously why they chose Salzburg as their last opponent and as a test match, the only opponent in a test match, I have to add. And so if I was a Bayern fan, I'd be looking at that result and say, okay, well, it's a friendly. I'm in the camp with things. Friendlies are often overrated by the media. But on the other hand, it does tell you a little bit of where we're at, right, with the squad. And the things that are maybe worrying in terms of the back line. But also the midfield. The attack obviously was working really well for them. So there's no issue there. But I think everything that you're saying right there is quite concerning. And then this goalkeeper situation too, that we have talked about now since the day Manuel Neuer got injured in December. And has been a running conversations ever since. And they said and briefed people of the media saying that the goalkeeper situation was going to be resolved by the day that Bayern Munich go to their training camp in Qatar. That was January 3rd. It's January 16th now. 13 days later, it's still not resolved, right? They have basically now shut the door on Alexander Nübel, which I personally think is a mistake. They have now gone back to Jan Sommer, with Gladbach saying, you want Jan Sommer, you have to essentially buy us that goalkeeper from Montpellier that we want. That's what's going on. And that is so much noise. That is so much noise. And Bayern Munich is always noise. But for a club that has promised themselves to get things done quietly, I actually think the Daley Blind move, the way it went as quickly as it went, it fulfills quite a lot of needs. When you when you look at his numbers at Ajax, at a team that plays a very similar style of football in Bayern, he actually was one of the leading players there and a lot of the stats. So, they found a player really quickly who can probably do the job. But then now they have this right back situation and the goalkeeper situation, and maybe the center back situation because of Benjamin Pavard. And it's all so loud. It's every day, nonstop. And there might not be a solution. And even if they get Jan Sommer, is he the solution? Because then next summer we have the same theater again.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I don't know. I mean, it looks like they're going to get Jan Sommer now because this Montpellier have apparently put this goalkeeper up for sale, to almost kind of entice Gladbach into buying him. So, look, they might get Sommer through. And as you said, they do have a habit of getting these deals through behind closed doors. So maybe they bring in a decent right back and everything's okay. But as things stand right now, in terms of preparation for the second half of the season, I just feel like Bayern are missing one or two players in that regard, either through injury or just by not signing players. So it'll be interesting to see how they do. In typical Bayern fashion, they might end up just blowing Leipzig away, and obviously what I'm talking about is nonsense. But I don't know. I'd be really intrigued to see. I'd be quite surprised if they were to keep up the intensity that they showed in the first half of the season. They obviously did very well in the Champions League, so we need to see if they can kind of keep that up. But it'd be interesting to see, because I did think, despite the fact that they are top of the Bundesliga right now, I do think at times in the first half of the season they did go long stretches without being entirely impressive, and far from kind of convincing, and they're now going to have to do that all with some really big injuries in that team. So we'll just have to wait and see. Yeah,
absolutely. Stefan, that's it from this week, or this Monday when we record. Really excited to have it all back. I'm curious to see how our predictions come true. Of course, there's so much more that we can talk about, and of course, we're going to have our preview show later this week, so stay tuned for that. We are also going to have our transfer roundup and our special show on top of that, so a little bit more content coming this week. So lots to be excited about. But as always, this show is brought to you by Bet Online. We'll be back with more content. Anything that you want to add before we call this a day?
In terms of housekeeping, it's probably worth mentioning that going forward, we are going to make some changes to the output from the podcast. So as things are right now, we obviously bring out the main show for free, we then do a subscriber show, and then we do the transfer show for free at the end of the week. Now that the Bundesliga is coming back, that end of week show will be replaced with a preview show, which will still be free, but we're now going to put the transfer show behind the paywall for subscribers, just because it's now going to become an extra show on top of. So it's going to be an extra bit of workload for us on top of our normal schedule. So we felt like it's only fair that we send that to subscribers who help support the show. That will also be going out beyond the January transfer windows. So we'll obviously just be using that show to pick apart transfer rumours, which, as we all know, go on long after the transfer windows open or close. But we'll also be using that to kind of talk about, transfer strategies that clubs should consider, what players are coming and going and should come and go. So we'll put out a post and explain it all this week. But if you don't sign up, if you're not a subscriber to the Substack, and you're kind of mulling it over, this week might be a good opportunity to kind of jump on board that, so you can continue listening to the transfer show and pick up the extra podcast. So we'll now have 2 bonus shows for subscribers going forward now every week.
Yeah, absolutely. More content is good, right? Also want to give one more shout out to the main show that we did last week. We had Freddy Bobic on the show, director of sport of Hertha Berlin. And I thought it was really interesting, really in depth, the sort of insight that really opened the hood, didn't he, on the ongoings of a Bundesliga club. So I want to give that another shout out. It's a timeless podcast. It answers a lot of the questions about the Bundesliga, 50+1, the bringing in investors, but also quite a lot of stuff about the German national team. So I want to give that one more shout out. And we'll be back with more content later this week. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Ziele in Sicht.
Today, we discuss Miro. Listen, when it comes to running client workshops, the dream, of course, is to get those creative juices flowing, right? But typically what ends up happening is thousands of hours get wasted because of poorly facilitated meetings. So I have Maya with me today. She's a consultant who runs Fortune 100 workshops, from leadership training to team building, and she has the insider tip on what makes things work. Maya?
Thank you, Jason. I've been doing this a long time. My number one tip is to bring everyone into that visual collaboration platform. So personally, I use Miro, and it's completely changed how I interact with the room. You have to give people a way to feel like they're in the room even when they're not. That's something you can do easily in Miro. Otherwise, they've seen the same slides and format 1,000 times.
Falling asleep, eyes glazing over, yawns, all that.
Exactly. When people follow me on the Miro board, everyone is literally going on a journey with me. We're adding thoughts, we're reacting, and we're voting for the best ideas. It's great.
Connective magic. I like it. That's MIRO.com.